Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I am your host, Ricky Camilleri. In 2008, Dustin Lance Black won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. Following that incredible achievement, he actually took time off from writing movies and TV to take the fight for marriage equality all the way to the Supreme Court. But while doing that, he never forgot his Texas Mormon roots and the family who needed his support just as much as the LGBTQ community did. In his new memoir, Mama's Boy, Black tells the story not just of his own success in film and TV, but mostly of his family's triumphs and their own progression, tracking their story all the way back to his grandmother. And he's here to talk to us about it now. Please welcome Dustin Lance Black. Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for writing this incredibly important book. I imagine not just important because it's your family and your story, but you found a way to tell a compassionate and I would say, a compassionate story about people who we may not always agree with, who you have not always agreed with, but you've loved nonetheless.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was the point. I didn't see a point in writing a book that was just going to pat myself on the back for that Supreme Court case or an Oscar or anything like that. To me, that didn't answer the question I ask young writers to tell me, which is what's the purpose? And not just what's the purpose right now, but what's the purpose looking into the future? And it was really just like a few years ago, I started having conversations with my mom about what we saw happening in our own family, which was that some of the political divisions, which we had many, my mom was Mormon, military, we grew up in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and there were some differences. There were some bridges that were starting to break down, and it was starting to get contentious and hot within our own family. And we thought, well, how is that those divides are growing, and how dangerous could that become? And we understood inherently in our relationship, because my mom, I mean, as much as she was raising us, we had to raise her. She was paralyzed from polio. So when our father vanished when I was 6 years old, leaving her with a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old, we had no choice but to bridge the divides. We had no choice but to have the curiosity about each other to figure out where that higher plane than politics lived. And we had to do that throughout our lives together. And finally, about 2 years ago, I thought, if we could do it, if my mom and I could find the bridges, if we could build them within our family, that perhaps our little American story might be useful to other families, might be useful in this time.
Did you find, you said that those bridges were kind of breaking down and that political divides were sort of getting a bit more contentious within your family. Did you find that was happening even after you'd built bridges about who you were and what she, her own sort of prejudices maybe against that before you came out to her?
So, before I came out to her, we hadn't done that work because I was in the closet. I was pretending. When I had come out, I was already out in Los Angeles, at UCLA, in West Hollywood. I was starting to date a little bit. When I came out to her, it was accidental. I tell that story in the book. I didn't mean to. We were having, it wasn't a debate because it was one-sided. She was preaching about don't ask, don't tell because she felt it was too inclusive, that gay people, if they were closeted, could serve in her military. She didn't like that. And as I heard her go on and on and on, my heart breaking, because she was no longer talking about gay people in theory. This was me and my friends. I shed some tears. And she read those tears like tea leaves, and she knew. And that was the beginning of a journey to rebuild a relationship with her. And really, that work that we did to rebuild that relationship, to start to come to terms with each other, for her to be brave enough to show curiosity in me and my friends, those are the lessons I learned that in this book, after you get through the first 2/3, which is some history, hopefully some compelling stories, I felt it necessary to put my feet where my opinions and my beliefs are, and to show that same curiosity she showed for me, and that same courage she showed to come meet my LGBT friends in California as a good Mormon conservative woman. I felt I needed to travel back to Texarkana, Texas, travel back to San Antonio, and travel back to Salt Lake City, Utah, to meet with leaders of the Mormon Church to see if I could show that curiosity with them, share the personal stories both ways with them that could start to rebuild relationships and build bridges of understanding. It was not easy.
Right. What were those meetings like?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. People say, man, this must be impossibly difficult. in these politically difficult and divided times. And that's just not true. As a lie that's being peddled, I think, by folks who find those divisions politically helpful or profitable, or by 24-hour news channels that love to be able to sell shaving cream and insurance by selling those divisions. And really the truth is, if you sit down at a dinner table across from somebody, in Texas, it's a little more fun because you can share some Jack Daniels. And in Salt Lake City, it's probably more like a lemon tea. But if you can do that, truly the divides start to melt away very quickly. You're still going to hear some things you don't agree with. That's a part of it. But I think what you start to see is that this lie being peddled, that politics, whether you put an R or a D on your voter registration card, is the highest plane there is. The highest plane, that is a lie. There is a far higher plane than politics. And when you have the courage to sit across from someone and the willingness to be curious about them, as you hope they will be about you, it becomes easy to build a bridge. And I found that with both the Mormon church and with my family back in Texas. And I hope that some of what came of those meetings that you discover in this book will be surprising, but also inspiring to others to start rebuilding those connections we've lost.
Do you find, though, that those bridges, when you build them, can also serve a excuse me for the word political, but a political purpose? And I think that I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, politics is used to get LGBTQ rights. It's used to sort of change the fabric of the country in a lot of ways, change laws. Do you find that those bridges that you build that are on a higher plane can serve that purpose as well, or you have to leave that purpose behind?
No, I think, listen, the issues that politics at its best tackle are very critical, very important. I will say, politics will always exist. We're never going to get rid of that. And there will always be divides. People come from very different backgrounds and perspectives and have very different interests when it comes to the law.
So I always think of, prior to marriage equality, hearing so often people say things along the lines that were like, hey, you seem like a nice guy. I just don't approve of your lifestyle, and I don't think that you should be able to get married. But you're a nice guy. I'll have dinner and I'll drink sweet tea with you.
Well, by the way, take up that offer to drink sweet tea.
Yeah, I love sweet tea.
But you have to listen. That doesn't sound good. That doesn't feel good when you hear that. I heard that many times on that campaign trail. But sit down and have that dinner. Sit down and have that meal, because when you approach those conversations, here's some things I suggest we don't necessarily solely lean on. Facts. This is going to sound racy. Science. Constitution and the law, as much as I believe they were on our side in our fight for equality as LGBT people and in other civil rights battles, I think the most effective way to create change is to take it one step further and to figure out the story, the very personal story that will help illuminate those politics, that science, that Constitution that should be on your side, and share that story. Because if you share all the science and the facts, the other side just digs in deeper. They just dig a deeper trench. It becomes warfare. It's not personal. It's a game. Right. That's what we're seeing going on right now. And it's not touchy and feely to tell a story. It's actually harder work. It takes a little bit more thoughtfulness. It takes the courage to get personal. And I say, if you can find that story of your own that illuminates all of those facts, use it. Use it at that dinner table, and I bet that person starts to shift. I also bet when they start telling you their personal story, you understand that some of the reasons they voted the way they voted, which you don't agree with, has less to do with politics and more to do with fulfilling the promise to make their kids' lives a little bit better than their own. And you start to see a little bit eye to eye, and perhaps you can find some common ground.
Did you feel like you found a lot of common ground? Were there any moments where you did not find common ground at all?
Oh my gosh, constantly. I mean, I'll use my cousin. There's a story in the book about my cousin Lynn in Texarkana, and I traveled back to Texarkana to see if I could reconnect. At one point, after we've had a little bit of Jack Daniels, he sends me back to his father's work shed. He says, "Look under the toilet lid." And I flipped up the toilet lid, and there was a picture of Barack Obama under it. We were never going to agree about that and all that meant. But as the night went on and our conversations continued, and I started to tell him about at this time, the guy I was dating who's now my husband, and he was listening. At one point, he opens up his phone and shows me pictures of his new girlfriend. And there is my cousin, who's always been so conservative, not exactly approving of, quote unquote, my lifestyle, is now comparing the butterflies in his heart to the butterflies in mine. You know, I don't think he's going to lead a gay pride march, but he's putting on his overalls, and he's driving from Texarkana to Dallas to be at the Black Tie Dinner, which is an LGBT fundraiser to support me in 1 week.
Wow.
Yeah, a little bit of progress. But we will never see eye to eye on what he did with the portrait of Barack Obama on the side of that shit.
Well, I wouldn't see eye to eye with that just because it's not funny. That would be, I mean, one, you can hate Barack Obama, but it's okay, whatever. That would be my feeling about that. Just
Yeah, I mean-
strict taste dismissal.
Right. But in his world, it was funny.
Yeah.
And in his world, I'm not sure he considers all that it means.
Right. You know, there's a story or there's a moment in your book where you're talking about your early days in LA where you're making short films with your friends and none of them are really landing. And some of your friends say, well, the best things that you've made have to do with your family and have to do with familial relationships. Was that something you were thinking about when you started writing this book? Because a lot of your work itself hasn't necessarily been nearly as familial or as personally familial as this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that I fixed that. That had a lot to do with the fact that I was a closet case and had never dated.
Yes.
And I mean, I didn't, if someone asked me to write a romance before I was 21 years old, I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
I certainly couldn't write a sex scene. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, you know, this focuses on family because I feel like that's where the story is. You know, this book should not be a skipping stone around my history. I hope my history is not finished being written yet. This is about a family that in today's age ought to be completely divided, and it's not. And it's not, it's taken a lot of work to see the value in keeping us close and to understand how to keep us close and how to not let this fallacy that the highest plane of being is politics infect our family. It's a bizarre thing, isn't it? I was saying earlier today, I've said this a little bit around the road. Can you imagine if someone said to you in this beautiful, miraculous universe we live in, that the most special thing about you, the highest plane of existence, is if you define yourself as a Republican or a Democrat? It's so absolutely absurd. But it's how so much of us have been taught to feel and believe lately. And really, it's a very recent phenomenon that it's gotten that divided and that we've lifted it that high. And I feel like, thank God for my crazy, wild, messy little American family, that somehow we've been able to avoid that.
I want to go back to a question that I think I poorly asked before, but you had said that you built after you accidentally came out to your mother and the two of you worked together and built these bridges and she came to LA to meet your friends. I was wondering if divisions started after that at all, after those bridges got built, if in the last couple of years, as the country itself has gotten more divided on other issues, did you see any division between you and family members who had already kind of come to support you?
Sure. And not, I had neglected many of the relationships in my family. I'm going to be honest. With my mom, no. With my mom, I think we figured it out. That was a tough couple of years there, but she showed up to the Academy Awards with the marriage equality ribbon on her dress, which was really meaningful to me. But my extended family, my cousins and my aunts, who I'd always been very close with, I had just taken steps away from them over those years. I knew...
Busy and getting older as well. It's a natural thing that...
I guess it's natural, and it wasn't natural for our family. We had family reunions. If I attended, I was very quiet. I would just go, play tennis with my brother, and that's not what we do in our family. I should have been playing horseshoes with my uncles, and I had let myself drift. I had fallen for it. I didn't want to have those tough conversations, and I didn't. I was being a little less than courageous in that time. And so it was really only in the past 2-3 years, since I've seen things become so toxically divided, that I thought, well, I'm at fault as well. And that's the journey of this. That's the journey of this book, is trying to do better. I have to do better. I had to do better.
How often do you find when you are trying to build those bridges and you're trying to sort of mend a politically toxic relationship, family relationship within the family, that so much of that is holding your tongue?
I don't. Again, I don't think I hold my tongue. I just pay attention to how I'm telling the stories and conveying my opinions now. So if it falls into if it starts to fall into a legal, constitutional, or scientific debate, I hit pause for a minute, and I start to think. And then I said, well, it's no longer two people talking to each other, as if we're both talking about this other thing out here, no matter how right we both think, or in my case, of course, no, I am. I know I'm right on this, but that's not going to help me. So you just bring it back to here, right? Get it eye to eye and figure out, well, how does that issue affect me personally? Or how has it affected someone else in my life personally? And get back to that. And if you don't know what that story is right then and there, hit pause on it for a second and be like, you know what, let me think about what you just said, and I'll get back to you on it. But, I only want to hold my tongue now when I feel like I'm falling into the trap of making it about politics and policy points and talking points instead of the personal one-on-one human interaction. We need more of that. I think we have to figure out in this country that our families are important. Our families build communities, and we still have such a thing as an American family. And I want to know how that's really built, and it's not built on being right all the time. It's not, I think anybody here can probably tell you that being right is overrated within a family. If you're right all the time in your family, you're probably not the most beloved in that family. You're probably the a-hole, right? I mean, come on. So, how do you bring it back home? It's not touchy-feely stuff. It's not PC stuff. It's hard work. It takes a little bit of extra thought. Make it personal.
Is there a part of you, you have done political work before. You have campaigned for marriage equality. Is there a part of you that is thinking of campaigning for a role as a member of office of some kind?
Oh, not right now, no. No. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But I think politics at its best is personal. It is familial, and it leans on personal story. I think changing the law is the same thing. The work that we did in Prop 8 to beat Proposition 8 in California, it was so much about a storytelling campaign by design. Did we think we had the Constitution and the 14th Amendment on our side? Absolutely. Were those arguments that were going to change my family's mind in Texarkana? Absolutely not. So whether I'm writing a screenplay or this book or waging a Supreme Court battle, story. I think it's the only way to change this.
Appeal to the empathetic side of human beings.
Just open your heart, man. Yeah. Like if you can't change this, you're not going to change that. And the best politicians know that. And the best politicians are fantastic storytellers. And it's why we're sometimes frustrated by politicians who can't seem to catch on, even though they're right about everything we agree with. Right. And you're like, why aren't they catching on? Why can't they find crossover appeal? And I say, well, they haven't figured out how to tell a great story.
Right, because they start that story that's like, I met a boy in Arkansas. And you're like, okay, this is a politician's story. We don't need that. It doesn't feel genuine in any way. Just share it.
Yeah. Share, and by the way, share your own. I know I sometimes get frustrated by those stories of others, and they are useful, but I kind of want to hear from them why a good politician can communicate with you how politics and the law have affected themselves and their immediate family, and we can connect with that.
Politics in the last couple years, of course, politics forever, but specifically in the last few years, has been wildly frustrating. And has felt like a dead end in a lot of ways. Was writing this book and going and talking to family members a way of breaking out of that sort of endless cycle of frustration that feels like political America right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It was also a way, as I think when I first pitched the book, it was called The Story of Two Americas. And the more I studied my own family, my own family's history, the more I then moved forward in the book to venturing back out to try and bridge some divides. I thought, well, that's a lie. It's another lie. It's another myth. There are not two Americas. There's certainly not one America. How boring would that be? There it is. I call it a story from our Americas, because there are many, countless, tremendous variety of Americas, but they're all ours. And we ought to care for them as we would a family of children who are all very different from one another. We ought to show empathy and compassion, try for understanding, show a bit of curiosity, and understand that this country is a wonderful place to live. It's an exciting place to live. It's a place you can grow because of variety. Because everywhere you go, it's a little bit different. It's an adventure. That was the great call of America, was the call to adventure. We don't want this to be one America. How dull if it was only two. I think there are many, and I think they are ours. And I wanted to write it to sort of break that myth as well. Because when you have two, you have a battle.
Yeah.
When you have our, you have the opportunity to create coalitions of the us's. Coalitions of very different people coming together to make sure that a plurality of self-interested folks never take rule and push us all down. Sadly, I believe that's where we are right now.
The self-interested folk are sort of creating this idea of the two Americas, creating this idea of a divided America.
Absolutely.
Versus sort of telling the story of 375 million people. I think that's
right.
the population of the country that is multi-ethnic, multi-gender. It's all over the place.
It's so smart. I mean, anyone who says to me that the current administration is stupid or foolish, I think they are foolish, but they're not stupid. It's
messaging-wise, they're not stupid.
It's a clever way for a plurality of people, not a majority, to gain power, is to divide. It's the oldest trick in the book. Ask Nero. It's the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer. Sell a narrative that we're divided. Stoke the fears of those divisions. And a little plurality, often heterosexual white men, can rule. And that's where we find ourselves. And I say to all my brothers and sisters around the country as I'm traveling around talking, I say, you got to remember, I think Obama said it very well recently, don't make this into a circular firing squad. We're going to have our differences. We're very, very different people. We have different interests, you know, and some of us are being treated worse under the law than others. That's true. But it is not the discrimination Olympics. You don't get a prize for being treated the worst. I'm glad we're investigating ourselves. I'm glad we're demanding to be treated equally. But the prize is building a coalition. The prize is building a bridge. The prize is being able to see someone who's quite different than you and finding common ground and locking arm and creating what Harvey Milk called the coalition of the us's. It's the only way the us's win. And it's the only way that the us's will regain power and take back control of this country from that plurality of the selfish who have sown fear throughout this nation.
Absolutely. I think we have some time for questions from the audience. Who has a question? Right here. Hi.
Hi. So, knowing everything that you know now, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Oh, my God. Know how powerful you were in your 20s. I think I did not understand that. I didn't have the courage of my conviction in my 20s, and I was very afraid. I followed more than I led, and I look to the new generation now, and I say, lead. You know, there are some times in the world and in a nation where the young must lead the old. We saw that in the mid and late 60s, and I think we're in that time again. Whether that is the treatment of minorities, or the environment, or gun control, the young must lead the old again. And so I would just say, have courage and speak up and understand that in your 20s you are powerful.
I think we have one more question right here.
Hi. In your opinion, who do you think is most like our generation's Harvey Milk, my generation, or the political front runner for LGBTQ causes?
Oh gosh, I hope there's, I wouldn't want to name one, because I hope there's many now. I mean, in Harvey's time, there were a few, right? There was Phyllis and Dell out in San Francisco. There was certainly Harvey. There was folks at the Mattachine Society. There were, you know, there were many Harvey Milks then. There are even more now. So I would hesitate to name anyone. And I actually think we need far more than one. We need hundreds and thousands, because what we know for sure, and that I think Harvey Milk would absolutely agree with, was that it can't just be the gay male movement. And so we need our leaders and our inspiration to look as diverse as we are as an LGBTQ community. So we need people to rise up from every corner of our very diverse community to inspire us. Certainly to let those youngsters know out in those areas that are not yet equal or free under the law that they have support, they have people fighting for their rights, so that one day a little Southern kid like me can stay home. They can stay home in the South, and they can succeed in the South. You don't have to leave the home you love to be safe and to be equal under the law. So we need those leaders to rise up.
Have you found, I mean, as much as you said it shouldn't just be a gay male movement or led by gay men, white gay men, have you been inspired to see someone like Pete Buttigieg do so well so far? This is very, very early stage of the primary.
Easy. I mean, absolutely inspired by him. It doesn't mean gay white men can't make their contributions. I mean, otherwise I better get the heck off the stage. I'm just telling you. But it also means that we need to make sure we're lifting up other voices in our community and sharing our stages. Absolutely. For me, that means making sure that my writers' rooms on my television shows are as diverse as we are in this world. And so,
even a show like When We Rise tells all of the stories that had to do with it, and not just the stories that would have been told maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago.
And we tried our best. I mean, we did very well to make sure our writers and our directors on that show were also gay and straight and black and white and men and women, so that it was, that the scripts were authentic and the show felt authentic, but also because it's we have to do it. We have to do that work. But listen, am I inspired by Mayor Pete? Holy cow, yes. I mean, absolutely. I think Harvey Milk said, you know, in one of his most famous speeches, you have to elect gay people because it sends a message of hope. To see a candidate rise that high, and to do so in a way where the main topic of conversation isn't who he loves, but what he's going to do for people like workers in this country. Well, that's an inspiration. And I think now young LGBTQ people growing up aren't thinking, well, there's a ceiling. I can't rise beyond perhaps senator like Tammy Baldwin. Now maybe I could be the president. You know, maybe there's a queer kid out there in Salt Lake City, Utah, and she's thinking, I'm going to take that White House. I'd love it if Mayor Pete has been a part of that.
Absolutely. Dustin, your book, Mama's Boy, is on shelves today, right? People can pick it up on Amazon and bookstores, anywhere books are sold, I think is the way that they say it.
I think that's right. I got to go to a bookstore. I haven't been to one yet. I haven't seen it on a shelf yet. I'm dying
that's going to be amazing. Congratulations.
I hope so. Thank you.
It's called Mama's Boy, A Story from Our Americas. Everybody please give Dustin Lance Black a huge round of applause. Let's hear it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.